If people are talking about some of the best anti-war movies of all time, they may bring up movies such as Platoon, The Deer Hunter, Full Metal Jacket, and All Quiet on the Western Front. But what if someone were to say, what is one of the greatest anti-war songs? And for most Australians, the answer would be I Was Only 19 by Redgum, written by John Schumann. It took me a while to decide which version of the song that I wanted to react to, and I finally decided that I was going to react to the original version that I found on Redgum's YouTube channel. However, I was also going to react to John Schumann's introduction, which you can find on the PTSD15 version. Let's get to it.
I'm sorry I can't be there with you tonight. When I wrote I Was Only 19, I was simply telling the story of my brother-in-law Mick Storen. Mick was deployed to Vietnam in 1969, and he'd been involved in a very serious mine incident in the Long High Hills. Our Vietnam veterans came home to a bitterly divided society, and they fell into the cracks. As opposed to the well-meant inquiries, commissions and parliamentary committees, in 4 minutes 19 seconds, I Was Only 19 enabled ordinary Australians to walk in the shoes and look out of the eyes of our Vietnam veterans. It stopped all of us in our tracks. We Australians are fundamentally decent and fair, and once we got it, we all look back in shame at how we treated our Vietnam veterans. I don't think we'll make that mistake again. What I didn't realise until much later is that I Was Only 19 is a sort of quickly understandable dissertation on post-traumatic stress disorder, as well as the effects of herbicides and insecticides on our Vietnam veterans. A few years ago, I scripted and narrated a DVD for the Army on post-traumatic stress disorder. It was designed for soldiers pre- and post-deployment. I interviewed a wide range of veterans from Vietnam, East Timor, Somalia, Rwanda, Iraq and Afghanistan. And like Mick Storen, all these blokes had the courage to tell their PTSD stories so that their other comrades wouldn't have to suffer alone for years like they did. One of the most arresting stories I was told came from a Vietnam veteran. When he demobbed, he tried to slip back into his life in rural Queensland. He wasn't having a very good time. He had rashes that came and went, but his doctor told him they were due to his wife using too much detergent when she washed his clothes. His toenails fell out, but his doctor told him it was athlete's foot. He suffered from insomnia, but his doctor told him he was drinking too much coffee. When he heard 19 for the first time, he told me he was driving on a country Queensland road. He pulled over onto the verge and listened to the song, and then he cried. And after he dried his eyes, he told me his first thought was, those bastards have been lying to me. Because clearly, if some bloke could write a song that spoke directly to his heart and his experience, he was not the only one. He sought out other vets and found there were veteran support groups scattered all over the place, loose, unstructured, but all determined to fight for justice and a voice. It was the start of a movement. I Was Only 19 has lasted so long because, among other things, it speaks the truth about PTSD. It sets it in a real-life context. What I've learned about PTSD is this: it doesn't mean you're soft, it means you're human. Armed combat is the highest form of public service. When Australian serving men and women come home from whatever conflict our government sends them to, we owe them and their families all the help and support that we can possibly give them. They didn't count the cost, and neither should we. We honour our veterans, and we must stand beside them when they face the difficult challenges of coming home, so often bringing with them psychological as well as physical injuries. Oh, and one last thing. Don't let anyone ever tell you that songs can't change the world.
United States veterans, and I'm sure New Zealand veterans also, had similar experiences to coming home to an ungrateful population who did not understand their experience, but also didn't seem to care. And before we actually get to the song, I do actually have a copy of the lyrics.
Mum and Dad and Denny saw the passing out parade at Puckapunyal. It was a long march from cadets. The 6th Battalion was the next to turn. It was me who drew the card. We did Penungra, Shoalwater before we left.
I imagine those might be cities or towns. I'm not really sure.
And Townsville lined the footpaths as we marched down to the quay. This clipping from the paper shows us young and strong and clean. And there's me in me slouch hat with me SLR and greens. God help me. I was only 19. From Buntow riding Chinooks to the dust at Newey Dad, I'd been in and out of choppers now for months.
Chinook.
We made our tents a home, VB and pin-ups on the lockers, an Asian orange sunset through the scrub. And can you tell me, doctor, why I still can't get to sleep? And night time's just a jungle dark and a barking M16. And what's this rash that comes and goes? Can you tell me what it means? God help me. I was only 19.
That's definitely PTSD right there. Obviously, insomnia is a big issue when it comes to vets returning home. They have flashbacks, nightmares, insomnia. And I'm glad that he did actually mention the rash. As we all know, the United States used Agent Orange in Vietnam, and the effects of that was devastating. Okay. Not just for the civilian population and the Viet Cong. I'm also talking about the veterans, the U.S. veterans as well as the Anzacs. When the United States forces returned home, it did take some years before the government actually recognized that if you have been exposed to Agent Orange and you and your family are suffering, then you can put a claim in and the government will help you and compensate you. On the other side of the coin, the Australian veterans have been told the opposite. They've been told that none of their symptoms or their kids' and grandchildren's symptoms via birth defects are from this Agent Orange exposure. They have continually denied any kind of compensation or help for these veterans, which is just so sad because even a court in New York City some years ago ruled that Agent Orange and similar chemicals that was deployed by U.S. forces did indeed expose many of the Anzac and U.S. forces in Vietnam and caused a multitude of health problems for them and their family members. So why has Australia dragged its feet when it comes to recognizing that Agent Orange exposure did indeed affect these Vietnam veterans? As of 2024, though, I don't know what the current government stance is. If you do want to drop that in the comments, I would appreciate it.
A 4-week operation, when each step could mean your last one on 2 legs. It was a war within yourself. But you wouldn't let your mates down till they had you dusted off. So you closed your eyes and thought about something else. And then someone yelled out, "Contact!" and the bloke behind me swore. We hooked in there for hours, then it got almighty raw. And Frankie kicked a mine the day that mankind kicked the moon. God help me. He was going home in June.
So that's two parallel but completely different sides of the same coin. July 20th, 1969. It was a day that Neil Armstrong set foot on the moon. For most people in the world, their only worry was about trying to find a box of champagne or a keg of beer or just trying to find a TV so they can watch the moon landing. Yet for these young soldiers fighting in Vietnam, their worry was about not getting killed or not stepping on a landmine. I just think that was a brilliant line that contrasted the average soldier's worldview and what they were going through versus an average bloke back home and what they were going through.
Frankie drinking tinnies in the Grand Hotel on a 36-hour rec leave in Bungtown. And I can still hear Frankie lying screaming in the jungle till the morphine came and killed the bloody row. And the Anzac legends didn't mention mud and blood and tears. And the stories that my father told me never seemed quite real. I caught some pieces in my back that I didn't even feel. God help me, I was only 19. And can you tell me, doctor, why I still can't get to sleep? And why the Channel 7 chopper chills me to my feet? And what's this rash that comes and goes? Can you tell me what it means? God help me, I was only 19.
Tunnel rat. This is just such a powerful song. And, okay, I'm going to try to get myself together here. I think a lot of veterans come home and they're unable to talk about their experiences because civilians just don't understand what they went through. So trying to talk about these experiences, it's like falling on deaf ears. It does not make any sense. And many of these veterans just want to move on with their life. I think the song is kind of like a way for veterans to be able to share their experiences without having to use their own words. Because this song, I think, encompasses many or most of the combat vets, whether you were a Vietnam vet, Iraq, Afghanistan, Somalia, wherever. I think the song just accompanies that to a certain extent because obviously certain things are very unique to Vietnam, such as Agent Orange, for example. I just wish this song could get more exposure in the United States because I think it has a lot of meaning, and I think that if some American vets did actually listen to this song, I think it would help them. And I think it would just give them an outlet saying, yes, this is what I went through, and guess what? Other veterans also went through the same experience. And I think that kind of gives validation to a lot of these veterans. I was lucky or blessed to only have one deployment to Iraq, and I actually volunteered to go, and that was back in 2005 and 2006. And I never actually saw combat, but I was a medic working at a hospital, but I saw more gore, death, and injuries than I would care to remember. And one of the reasons why Australia holds a special place in my heart was because I actually worked with the Australian infantry in Baghdad. If you're an Australian, you might have heard the name Jacob Kovsko. He was Australia's first casualty in Iraq. And I happened to be with his unit, with his battle buddies on guard duty, just meters from where the incident actually happened, where he lost his life. That was one of my worst days in Iraq. One day I could maybe make a story time about that. But as bad experience as that was for me, I know that there are some veterans who have much more horrible stories than that one. But anyway, thank you guys so much for watching. If you do want to help spread the word of this song, I could use a like, comment, or share. My respect goes out to all vets. And if you do want to watch a similar video to this, then here you go.